Let's put the X in extras. How you
Yeah.
doing, Steve? This is Doc. We're going to talk extras on Destroyer today.
Yes, we are.
We just chatted about the album itself, and we are now going to deep dive into a couple things. Maybe take the gloves off and fight a little bit over a song or two. One
Well, you talked
specifically.
about we'll have I don't know if I can wait, man. Beth, it's all right. Sorry. Yes, welcome to the show. We are here to talk a little
You
more.
sound so enthusiastic to be here
I
today.
I couldn't help it. Destroyer is just such an interesting album as a whole because just Kiss in general, their roadmap of albums it just takes them on such an interesting trajectory. And I guess I like that. I think of a good like Black Sabbath. I love Black Sabbath. You listen to especially their early stuff, right? And
Yeah.
and it's phenomenal. I love everything about Sabbath. But especially their early stuff is the each subsequent album, in my opinion, isn't a gigantic departure from the previous one. I mean, it just isn't. There's different musicianship and different lyrics, but generally speaking, you listen to a Sabbath album, especially those first 10, 15 years, the Ozzy years before Dio. I'm trying to be really not derogatory in saying that they sound the same, but in some ways they do, right? There's a brand sound to them, I guess is what I'm getting at. Kiss, it's like every album is just this zigzag, right? And they kind of had this, I don't know, this happy, I don't want to say just happy-go-lucky type sound, generally speaking, with the first album with Dress to Kill. Hotter Than Hell was kind of in between, had this darkness to it. And then they throw out Alive, which was just this, until they did that and then released Rock and Roll All Night as the single from that. And it, got onto the Billboard. And then people were like, oh my God, these guys are, killer. Then they follow this up with Destroyer, which all in all, obviously production values go way up, but it's just a far more mature sounding album and still heavy, right? So it's kind of like the unpleasant cousin to, or the angrier cousin of Hotter Than Hell in some ways. That's just right. So it's like that's kind of what I'm getting as we get to this album. The shift changes again. So instead of following the trajectory that they were on with their last studio album, Dress to Kill, they go almost an entirely different direction with Destroyer. That's my first impression of it.
Yes, and mature was one of the notes that I had written down.
Oh,
They do feel more mature, songwriting, vocally, production wise. They're taking that next step, finding their sound, and just moving forward. So this was I understand how it was kind of a landmark album for a lot of Kiss fans because it did take that next step, and it was a significant step, I think.
mm-hmm.
And like I say, if we went through all the songs and rated them, if you took Great Expectations off the album, I think it would be super solid. I think that was a little bit of a weird one to put on there, but the rest of it, I have no complaints over it because that was a 4 for me, and it kind of dropped the average down a little bit because the rest of them are rated pretty high.
Yeah, agreed.
So I want to just quickly say that I love this album artwork.
Yeah.
The cover is really cool. I guess there's not a lot more to say about it. I like that it's kind of cartoony.
Mm-hmm.
It's got some color to it. We did talk about how much we like the black and white of Dress to Kill and the debut album, sort of that monochromatic look. But this was cool because it was cartoony and it kind of made them characters.
Yeah.
Almost the superhero look. So that's neat. I like that. Cool album cover. So what do you want to get into here? Do you want to just go right at it and just ring the bell and talk about Beth?
Well, we can. So I think, just to kind of add to your thought about just the cover itself, right? The kind of the comic book cover. What I liked about it is it coincided with the attitude of the album that the first couple of studio albums are great albums, in my opinion. But they don't tend to have the independent characters of each band member starting to come out. I mean, they hint at it, but I think they were still trying to find that. This firmly starts to implant Paul as the way, upfront, in your face, rock and roll frontman. And this really firmly puts Gene on the map as the demon. And, he gets his God of Thunder moment, which wasn't even his song that he wrote, but God, I'm glad that he did get to sing it, because that is what I identify, Gene's character with, right? So they really take this album and they start to, they really start to individualize each other's points. So, like, even Pete, like you do get Beth in there, which is a bit of a departure, but it's that, again, that raspy voice. So you're starting to understand, like, okay, the cat has kind of his own world, which maybe is not quite as heavy as Gene, but it makes it independent. And then you've got Ace on kind of the outskirts there, which in and of itself makes him very appealing to a lot of people, because at this point you just knew very little about that guy, right? So you have that mysterious side of Ace. Other than he's just a phenomenal lead guitarist, he hadn't sang anything yet, so nobody even knows what this guy sounds like unless you deep dove and could tell that he was singing the third verse of Coal Gin in Alive. But other than that, you really had no, so you have individual components that really start to present themselves cohesively, and I think that was one of the big selling points of this. But to your latter point, yes, then you get Beth, which is not the worst song. It's not my least favorite song. But it was too much of a departure for me. It's just, I maybe it's just because it is generally overplayed, and despite my best intentions to listen through the ear of, this is the first time I'm hearing it, I just can't get past it. It's a beautifully written song. And it's the one time that I just don't think Pete's raspy voice lends itself to a ballad. I just can't. I can't. It's not in tune. It doesn't sound appealing to me.
It's all fair.
Yeah.
So, not that we need to jump into Black Sabbath a lot, but they did a few songs that were really mellow.
Mm-hmm.
Planet Caravan and Changes and some of those tunes. And that's
all right.
That's a further departure for me than this is for Kiss.
Sure.
So I guess maybe we're establishing Peter as sort of more of this sensitive little kitty cat, character wise. But yes, you're correct. Like Ace, he kind of was the George Harrison,
yes,
the quiet one that, the quiet lead guitar player, that he was kind of mysterious and sort of nobody really knew what he was all about, because he didn't, flaunt anything. He didn't sing much. He didn't, he had a cool stage presence, and he was kind of just tripping all over the place. And he actually always looks like he's going to fall when he's playing live.
Yeah.
I don't know if he does that on purpose just to act kind of weird.
He gets into a whole other world when he plays, though, too. Part of
that.
Yeah.
It's fun to watch him. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's cool. Anyway, back to Beth. So I don't know why I rated this so high. I may have had the emotional piece take over just a little bit on that one.
What did you rate it again? I know we just talked about it.
That was a 10. That was a 10.
Yes, that's okay. Explain where this 10 comes from.
Okay, so I think it was gutsy to put it on the album.
Yeah.
So in previous albums, Peter did sing a bit, but this was kind of one that was his, that he kind of got to take full ownership on. It kind of gave him an identity, created a huge hit, shows that Kiss isn't just this weird, crazy hard rock band. They're able to do something, and they still play Beth live, sort of. Every concert, because everybody loves it and they can slow it down a little bit. And in the 80s they started doing a little sort of more ballads, I guess, but they were heavier ballads, hard rock ballads, and this was more, I don't even know if I'd consider this a ballad. It was more of just a really mellow song. But I don't know, maybe it was just because the first time that I had heard it, I was quite young, and it was just a really cool song. And I love orchestral arrangements in music. even with hard rock bands or metal bands even. I
Mhm.
love Metallica S&M. I really like, some of the stuff that Pink Floyd has done. Uh, Oddly enough, their Avenged Sevenfold has done some really cool orchestral stuff. They're a very sort of controversial band too,
Mhm.
um, but they've done a lot of cool orchestral stuff and arrangements with like bassoons and like saxophones and string sections and all that. So I just appreciate that there's more depth to the band than just four chords on guitars. So
Mhm.
that song showed that they could do something different.
Mhm.
Plus, I have the sort of emotional attachment to it a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. As we were reviewing this just before this extras, I was thinking about it too, because the one consistent that I had with you too is, aside from Beth, Great Expectations being a bit of a departure for the album, and I can't help but wonder what would have happened if, because I mean, look at God of Thunder, right? Like Paul wrote it and he was intent on singing it, and then the producers said, nope, this is going to be a Gene one, right? And it worked out for the best. So what could have happened if Gene got to sing Beth in his, because when he sings and actually uses his voice, it lends itself really well in some of those softer songs, right? And if Pete got to listen or sing Great Expectations, I feel the rasp would have worked in Great Expectations. I just feel like it doesn't work in Beth. And I'm not against orchestral arrangements. I love strings. I love them. I do. I like them. Metallica S&M. I love that album. But I specifically, from a Kiss standpoint, there's a lot of stuff on the Elder that I like, and that is going to be a fun album to review with you, because we are going to have a lot of different viewpoints. I'm certain, but so it's not just about that. It's the combination of, I think it's just that orchestral groove. There's the softness with Peter just not necessarily being able to sing in tune. I know that he wasn't, and he even admitted that, right? Like he wasn't necessarily good at that, but that wasn't what the point of it. He wasn't necessarily trying to. It was just was singing his heart out. So, I mean, I respect it for that, which is why I didn't give it a 4. But just from an overall listenability, I can't get past the 5. So this will have to be probably an agree to disagree, right?
Yeah, and that's cool. It's interesting because that album probably sold way more copies just because of that song, because it was their sort of big number one,
Mm-hmm.
the only number one
Yeah.
that they've had. So just imagine if they had taken Beth off and not ever put
Released
that
it.
on there.
Yep.
So what would happen in that instance? Do you think Destroyer would have just been another Dress to Kill?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I have to give Peter a lot of credit. You read, and again, it's so hard when you read all the different stories, because the band members constantly bicker, and then they are constantly have each other's backs. I mean, they are very much like brothers in that sense. And one year is, they all have something really terrible to say about each other. The next year they're, talking as if, they've been, best. And so it's just hard to know where the line is of truth to how many times you've told a story that you've considered it truthful, right? So Peter talks about the recording of that track in particular, right? Which is kind of slightly contradictory, but in general, not really, because he talks about when they were, Gene talked about this part, how they would, and I mentioned this in the review, how they would split up sometimes, and people constantly would assume that, Gene and Paul were always together and Ace and Peter were always together. Well, that wasn't always the case. It depended on the situation. And many times Gene and Peter were together and Ace and Paul were together when they were traveling, or, whatever. And it was one point where Gene and Peter were traveling together, and Peter was humming the melody or whatever Gene's asking him. And it was a song I wrote, and originally called Beck, because it was meant to be a joke. I assume the story about his old band member and his girlfriend or wife that was constantly calling, right? But then Gene kind of convinced him, like, you need to bring this, to Ezrin, and this needs to be, this is a song. But then when Peter starts to tell it, in the studio, he talks about how Ezrin wanted to take this entirely seriously. So he had, the orchestra show up and they're all in tuxedos. He wanted Peter in a tuxedo because he was treating this with the regalia, like the as much as he wanted it to. And Peter had a hard time because he got into the booth and he's ready to sing, and all he can do is see across the way in the engineering booth, and he sees Paul and Gene essentially snickering and laughing at the spectacle, which really hurt his feelings, right? So it's kind of a bummer, and at the same token, I got to give him a lot of credit, because if that is in fact true, he pushed through, and he, put something that he was extremely passionate about, and I got to give him credit for that, mostly because what I do like about this, not the song, but because it made such an imprint, it allowed him to get a couple more songs in his last couple albums, and he releases my two favorite Peter songs on the subsequent couple of albums here that we'll talk about. I'm not going to talk about them now, but without him doing this, I don't think he would have been able to do those other ones, and those are fantastic songs.
Awesome. So it's kind of almost a stepping stone to the next level.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, so God of Thunder, I rated very highly at a 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to just quickly chat about that one a little deeper, because it's so cool. And like the album version is so much better than it is live.
Yeah. Agreed.
And that's one that I would kind of switch to, where the album version is just better, because I think it has the weird creepy children and some of the sound effects, and I like Gene's vocals better in the studio on this one.
Yeah.
But when he does it live, they do put a cool vocal effect on his voice for that last verse, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it must be some sort of like a sub-octave sort of vocal effect, so it makes him sound like he's this massive,
Yeah.
where he's, I'm the Lord of the Wasteland, that verse where they throw that on there, and that's just really awesome too. But in the album version, I'd forgotten, because I hadn't listened to it for quite some time, that he actually kind of speaks that last verse.
Yeah.
So it really is establishing him like, just like, I command you to kneel, I'm the God of Thunder, and I'm this big, powerful, and it fits his personality so well.
It's so hard. It's still to this day, it's hard to believe that he didn't write that, or that
about himself, basically.
Yeah, or that Paul didn't write it about him. Like, Paul is so convinced, like, this is me, right? And it's like, is it though, Star Child? I just
right. Well, Gene can be the God of Thunder, and you can be the Prince of Stars.
Prince of Stars. There you go. I like
it worked out fine, because Paul gets some amazing tracks on this too, so again, it's not like nobody gets showcased way more than anybody else on this album, which I really, really like. It's a very balanced album as far as the quality in the songs, in the presentation, in how the band presents themselves individually and collectively as a group. I mean, it's a damn good album in that respect.
Yeah. So I was at 7.4, you were at 7.5. So what do you think it was that sort of held that back? I mean, was it Beth and Great Expectations?
I think it was.
I mean, those were our lowest rated. So if we took those off the album and made it an 8-track album and just took those 2 mellow ones off, would it have been better?
Here's the thing. In my opinion, it's a good debating question here, because this is kind of a lot of this material between Destroyer and Love Gun and Rock and Roll Over, right? There's just this mesh of not randomness, but the song type and quality. The songs that they're presenting are very similar, but then also very opposite in a lot of respects. And basically, what I'm getting at is the Destroyer starts off so insanely different than the first 3 albums, combined, really. Like, it's these guys got a lot to say, and they're going to do it a lot more aggressively. And they don't lose that. Usually what happens is a band will typically release and they put an extremely strong opener that catches your attention. It's like, yes. And then they follow it up with something that's less than attention grabbing, and it kind of detracts from, the rhythm. And that's the way I listen to albums, right? The thing was with this one, it didn't do that. It increased, because it was Detroit Rock City is all four of them, this is who we are as a band, right? And then you get kind of Paul getting to step out in front after that and saying, this is the band, but this is me, the king of the nighttime world, right? So it's kind of, to me, I hear that song and I get a really strong Paul spotlight. And then you'd think, well, they pull back, and like if they put Great Expectations or Beth, the album just loses its steam. But then you get God of Thunder, and it's like, oh my God, it is just this boom. It's just relentless, mature, heavy, character-driven rock, right? And then you get Great Expectations. So it's hard because it's such a departure after such continual rhythm building. And I think that that's what. So my point is, if you take like Great Expectations and Sweet Pain, like, which is another one I didn't rate very high, but I like the songs enough that if they showed up on Rock and Roll Over or even Love Gun, I probably would have rated them higher because those albums kind of have a little bit more levity to them. Does that make sense?
Totally.
So
I think there's got to be a flow to an album, and that was missing on the first one for me. It was sort of, the heavy stuff, and it goes into the corny stuff. And I did listen to the original Kissin' Time last night, by the way.
Oh yeah. Bobby Rydell.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that was from the first one. We shouldn't probably jump too much into that, but it was very good, actually. I love that style of music.
Yeah, I think it was just because there was there are some, just amazingly recorded songs here, so powerful holistically. It brought it up as a whole, but the departures were just too much of a departure for this type of an album for me. I think that's why the rating is still excellent, but not in the top for me, which is surprising. I think Destroyer tends to be thought of as classic Kiss fans as, I don't know, I would guess between that and Love Gun, those seem to be the two that most of them typically fixate on. I can tell you right now, neither of those are my favorite Kiss albums, so.
It'll be interesting to find out by the end of this which Kiss album overall is my favorite.
I'm interested. I already know mine. I'm even before ranking the rest of them, I'm confident I know which one mine is. But I could be wrong. But I'm more excited to find how yours does, because some of these albums are going to be really interesting to get your take on. It's gonna be fun.
Alrighty, yeah, looking forward to it for sure. Alrighty, well, so Rock and Roll Over is next, correct?
Sure. Rock and Roll Over is next,
and yeah, I'll be listening to that. Oh, the other thing I was going to just mention is that I love these conversations because we can not only nerd out on this stuff, but when you will say something like, make a point about something that's kind of strong to you, okay, I can go back and re-listen to this stuff and get a completely different score. I would score it different. So when I prepare for these things, I listen to the songs probably 2 to 3 times each, depending on how well I know them.
Same here.
Like a lot of these early albums, I know a lot of the stuff. So I haven't been listening to them multiple times, just a couple.
Yep.
But as we get into this further, especially into the 80s, it's going to be interesting because I might score some of these 80s albums as like 5s.
Yeah.
Because typically I don't really love that style. It kind of, they changed a lot in the 80s. But anyway, so let's say that I score them a 5 and then I go back and listen to them one more time just for fun, or a couple of songs that you say, oh, give that another listen. And we've done that in some of these. Give it another listen, see what you think now.
Yep.
If you're listening for this, and that's cool. So I'm actually going to go back today while I'm just hanging around and listen to a couple more of these Destroyer tunes again, another time, just to kind of see what maybe I had missed or something like that.
You do the same for me. I unfairly put any iteration of Firehouse into my just never going to listen to again. But I can't change my rating of the studio version, but you definitely made me re-listen to the live versions again, and it's just an incredibly different song. Especially when you are hearing it through the ears of what you haven't, like that one part of your subconscious that's saying you don't like the song, so you don't even listen to it, right? Why don't you like this song? And then you hear from somebody that does like the song. It's like, okay, it's a different lens, and I agree. That's one of the best parts of this podcast. So
For sure. I still like the siren.
God, you have to end it on this one. Fine. All right. We'll agree to disagree, my friend.
All right. Well, put on your fire hat and get out of here.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Catch you later on Rock and Roll Over.